Hi everyone, it's your Simmer here. So welcome back to the Generational Farm. Just after midnight on the server here. Again, the time is off quite a bit. It's just kind of the normal starting time for me during the day. It's just server just happened to roll over. So it just means grass is ready, because that's what I was waiting for with September. Normally it'd be probably approaching 6 hours later than this in time. So we got told, today is January 6th, we got told in the morning of January 4th that our first random event was coming, and it basically said storms are blowing in and it may have an impact to crops. Not sure exactly what's going to happen. I haven't seen anything, but I haven't been around the map, and nobody on our server other than one is doing crops, and the crops they're doing are sugar beets. So the other thing I'm looking at as I go to dump the first load, yeah, the silos are pretty close together. This is actually the first one, this is the second one. So I'm going to just start with the first one. Both of them are getting pretty full, but I can put another load in here before I have anything happening as far as that I run out of capacity. Now the specific message is could impact or damage crops. So obviously damage crops is easy, and they kind of, in explaining generational farming in the beginning, explained what that kind of an event would be anyway. From the standpoint of base crops, which would be that operations staff would come in and destroy set percentage of crops for each player and so forth. Now, unless they're going to step outside of what I would say would be the bounds of any remotely realistic type of thing, grass is not going to be impacted. I mean, grass gets wet. I mean, if it was flooded and it was waterlogged or something, it might be difficult to do anything, but even then, grass is pretty resilient. So I think that's where impact comes into play, is I think if someone has cut grass laying on the field, obviously a storm, heavy winds could blow that away for certain. So if you had things around, potentially, I suppose, although again, given the weight of things and what that would have to be, and I don't know that it would be destruction, as if someone's doing silage baling. I suppose bales could be maybe moved around, but once again, I don't know that you'd have bales that would be destroyed. So in short, my hope is, if the weather event hasn't already happened, that if it's still going to come to pass sometime today, that the impact for me specifically is going to be non-existent. I would think it would be pretty, I don't know, be pretty cruel, I guess, to be like, ooh, it destroyed your silos and stuff, and you lose all of that. And it said 2 crops. It didn't go so far as to say buildings or anything. And I think, given, again, the way this plays out, that would be a pretty tough hit for anybody to take. Because, again, this is all very much a razor's edge survival type of thing. If suddenly it's like, oh, I gotta rebuild. In my case, if I went back to the full amount, I gotta rebuild 2 $60,000 silos, I need 120,000. Like in my case, I at this point have enough that I could do that, but obviously it's still a hit. Like, I go from 155 to I'm sure my mind is not working, down to 35. And for some folks, we've got 1FM on the server, for example, that it's kind of become the running commentary when they're taking, say we had a lot of potatoes yesterday, so I did do 1 potato contract, but that was all I could really stomach. But I think he did 2 or 3, and when asked like why he puts himself through all that work, he's like, well, if I don't even think I'm going to make it to the next round. So he knows like he's not going to have a positive balance in any way, and then that type of a hit to someone like that would be irrecoverable. So I'm hopeful that whatever impact this random event is going to have is going to be within some form of logic as to how it's applied. I'm sure someone who's not growing grass and is growing crops would be a little bit less concerned if, say, somehow, our grass got all torn up along with their crops. But I think part of the point is, I can mow my grass in the rain. I can do it. Like, the grass is resilient to things that crops aren't. So to me, other than, if I had a camera at ground level, like here, I'd see my grass whipping around through the storm, but there really shouldn't be any impact to the grass unless I was leaving windrows of grass laying on the field because I didn't have capacity in the silo, which last year at this time, in this harvest, was exactly the situation I was in. At the end, if you recall, I was leaving probably a third of my crop on the field because I didn't have room. Now, I don't have that problem because I put in the second silo. So I'm hopeful that that means I don't have an impact from this particular random event. And that's supposed to be, kind of obviously how it would work in the real world is, depending on what other decisions you've made, you may have an issue, you may not have an issue. So I was, curious what was going to be happening. I haven't heard folks lamenting in the chats for the other servers, woe is me, I lost half my crop, so forth and so on. But it may be something that's going to occur today. And to some degree, if it's going to occur today, like, this would make a little more sense because it's really the first day that kind of all crops are ready to be harvested. So it would be possibly one of those situations where a farmer who had a harvest that was ready to happen today, if they wait, say, another 12 hours, which would be the evening in the time that I think most of the staff works and so forth, and heading into the weekend, would give them time to work on it, but would also have given the farmer an opportunity, if they were one of the lucky ones, to have gotten in early and gotten the crop off the field and avoided the challenge of the storm, which once again would be a good recreation or a good simulation of what a real farmer is dealing with. All the time you hear of them, like, we've got a storm front blowing in the next week, is going to be a washout. Like, we are going to, haul butt to get everything we can harvested today, because after this we know we can't harvest in a week and we may lose everything else in the field. So that has been my thought of the type of event and the impact of this event that is going to happen. So in short, I'm expecting myself to be immune from this because I'm mowing and collecting in one swath like there's nothing going on. I mean, in theory, I suppose they could somehow be like, you can't come in and harvest, because again, we've got to keep in mind, like, they've got to be able to do things within the capabilities of Farming Simulator and the engine itself. Like, there's no destruction. For example, there's nothing like, ooh, there's a wildfire mechanism. Like, you've got a farm in California and wildfires came through and burned everything, like they talked about when they gave the example of crop impact, that staff would come in and plow under a certain amount of your crop. Like, if they said, you're losing 25% of the crop, they'd come in and plow under 25% of the fields. Which for standard crops makes sense, because at the end of the harvest, like, I've got to go ahead and I may have to cultivate, I may have to plant. I will definitely have to plant. But grass, once it's planted, grows again. So it would really be an unfair impact to those of us with grass to say, oh, the grass got ripped out of the ground, because first off, it doesn't really happen. I mean, I think even in the most violent storms, sure, it gets muddy, the grass is beat down and this and that, but like it's there, and it's very different to have staff say, come through with really large plows, like bring the FSN equipment over and just, hit fields with large things and then go away, than it is to say, "Ooh, I lost this crop," meaning they have to come through and mow all this, which will take them 2 hours on my fields, maybe less with bigger mowers. And to me, that seems like a heck of a lot of work for a dynamic to, in essence, try to do something that, everybody got impacted. And the issue then is, realistically, I would say if everyone gets impacted by every random event, then those events almost have no point in existing, because like if we're all losing 25% of our crop because it impacts everything versus grass basically being immune to most things. Because I think it's important to denote the fact that I think it was made clear in questions that were asked that yes, all servers are going to be impacted the same way. So meaning there will be a storm on all the servers, and whatever the impact that storm has would be the same on every server. So if, say, they determine 10% of the crops are going to be gone or unable to be harvested, which I assume means they'll plow them under. That doesn't necessarily mean that, say it's a crop event, that then everyone has to have crops impacted. Because I think that's what some people are going to think, and I think they're just, my contention would be they're not thinking appropriately and logically, because that's just not what happens in the real world. Decisions I've made on how I'm running my farm are going to allow me to weather something that another farm next door may not. So that just goes back to how I think the decision to do grass versus the decision to do crops should mean that the event will impact us differently. Whereas, again, if they'd have something that impacts facilities and, silos are destroyed, let's say they did that, then the fairness of the rule and the intent of the rule is that every server with silos would have that impact. I'm just struggling, I guess, to figure out something other than grass and these crops that really realistically would be something that would occur. Because as I said, I still think everything else is far too devastating otherwise to really make it not just be something that creates utter frustration across the entire player base. Because as I said, losing that or even losing equipment, like those things that really are loss leaders that are challenging, I don't know. I mean, I guess because they're applied to everyone, you could make the argument, yes, it sucks, but it sucks equally for everyone. But again, not everyone's going to have silos, and not, even if you're doing something with equipment. I'm trying to figure out where I was at, but yeah, I was coming up this row, I think. Yeah, now I see the little bit of the windrow that was left. But even on equipment, let's say tractors, something happens and, everybody loses whatever tractor they have. Like, I have a small tractor, someone may have a medium tractor, someone may even have a large tractor. The impacts are significantly different in a way that, once again, is on a dynamic that is very difficult for a farmer impacted that way to recover. And I suppose the argument could be made that, well, they made the decision to buy that type of equipment, just like I made the decision to plant those type of crops. But to me, it's just an order of magnitude different. Now, the other dynamic that could come into play here, which I think would be just, I don't know how large the staff is, so that across 5 servers is what we really have with active players. I think there's 6 generational farming servers, but there's nobody on the last one. I think that's there for potential expansion if suddenly people want to join in the next generation or something. Is they could move the effect truly server-wide and go into non-player owned farms. And the point of that at this time of the year, for example, is that there's going to be a lot of standard crop harvest that is going to come available as contract work today. And so if you destroy, say, 25% of the contractor fields and plow them under, you're not able to harvest. The question becomes, like, how does that really work with the contract creation engine? Like, if you come in and say there's not a contract on a field, if you do something and then leave it, does the contract engine ignore that? And I just realized as I was turning around that last statement was clear as mud. So if they came in, I think they'd have to basically buy that contractor's field to work it. They'd go ahead and do whatever damage they were going to do, then put it, sell it back, and basically the contractor has it again. Like, you'd almost have to test that to see, if I do that, what impact does it have to contract generation in the future. And that would just seem a lot of work for, while an interesting dynamic, one that just might be very, very difficult to implement. So your next question might be, hey, Mature Simmer, you said you weren't going to show a lot of grass work because we've seen a ton of that. There aren't any other contracts right now that have come up. While, again, I'm expecting today to be a big harvest contract day for things other than potatoes. There's still a potato contract out there. I'm not taking it. If anybody wants it, they're willing to have it. I did my potato yesterday, and I continue to be in that thing of I don't know that potatoes are worth it. Just for a mental health thing for me. They take so long. I think I always underestimate by far how long they're going to take. And again, because I had distractions, I couldn't work it straight. The time it took, which was 7 hours to harvest field 48, which is one of those small straight fields down south of here, I was not estimating it would take that long. Now again, I had to keep stepping away, so it physically, 7 hours passed between the time I took the contract and to the time it was completed. It probably was 3 hours, 4 hours of work, but I was probably estimating at most 3/4 of that. Realistically, half of that was like, this will take me, 2 hours. It's not that large of a field. I get it's potatoes and this and that, but it always takes longer, and then I'm always kind of kicking myself for having taken the contract. So, while it generates some income, I still don't think it's at the same level as far as throughput per hour that a standard harvest contract would be. And it is a calculated risk then that I'm taking. Basically, well, if I leave potato contracts for everybody else on my server, is that going to be the thing that gets them to go ahead of me? But I'm really kind of mentally at the point that it's like, if that is the case, then so be it. Because as I said, there's other things that I can't control, that are just real life, obviously superseding what this is, which is just an entertainment pastime where I'm going to be out of pocket for a week and I'm not going to be able to work anything anyway. So there's going to be impacts that are going to be pretty substantial when I can't work the farm for an entire year because I'm gone for a week, for example. And I did verify, unfortunately, that the week I'm going to be gone, yes, it's basically going to be summer and into early autumn, so I'm probably going to miss out on a lot of harvest contracts. I'm going to miss out several rounds of grass harvest, so there's a real impact there. And so kind of busting my hump for every other time of, I'm going to do potato contracts no matter what, because that's what's going to make things up. It's too much. So not doing it. So I'm going to be looking for contracts throughout the day. We'll see, with time I've got available and what comes up, what coincides, because once again, given that the server's not at 6-7 hours ahead where it normally would be, where this would be, basically 7-8 o'clock breakfast time for most people. And it is about when I've seen contracts pop up, if they don't come in and adjust server time, or if they do and I don't realize they do, and people are in, there's the possibility others will grab contracts before I see them. Because at this point, 7 hours from now puts it kind of mid-afternoon in real time, and I may, be working on other things that don't allow me to pop into game, and suddenly we may have 10 harvesting contracts. Now, the issue is, again, I don't know that there's enough FMs to consume them all throughout the day anyway. I mean, I think we do get them all done throughout the day if it's one of those years that everyone wants to do all the work they possibly can. But I'm sure, others are feeling similar to me, that, now that I'm further along, I feel less compelled to have to do everything. And I think it's just a little bit natural. It could be burnout, it could be whatever. I mean, just like folks who have decided grass may be the way to make money and win this thing, but they hate grass work enough that they're just not willing to swallow that pill, and they're doing something else. And they know that that's going to impact their ability to be at the top, but they're like, if I do grass work, it's not fun, and I won't enjoy it. Similarly, I'm not at the point where I think I'm going to be spending, 8 hours on a day like today doing contract work like I did in year one. It just doesn't feel as necessary. And I inherently understand that the dynamic hasn't changed. Like, if someone else doesn't have that attitude, that gives them an opportunity to gain ground on me, even though I may be ahead because of other decisions I've made. Every decision has an impact. So I'm going to finish working on the grass, keep looking for contracts that may be like I've done before, or if a contract pops up, I'll jump out of my tractor, I'll go work on that. And then I'll come back to the grass later. And then, if there's some impacts that I can share that I see, that I hear about, whatever, from this random event, I'll certainly share it. But that was the reference in my thumbnail for the previous episode of Calm Before the Storm, is at that point when I was getting ready to post that video, but after I had already recorded it, so therefore I couldn't mention it in that recording that this random event was occurring. That was why the thumbnail had the title Calm Before the Storm, because there's a storm coming, is what we were told. So with that, I'm going to wrap this up, and I'm going to keep doing my work, but I'm going to let you go, and I'll see you next time.